Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or when you're listening on the recording, whenever you may be here. My name is Karl Sakas. I'm an agency consultant sharing today about helping you and your agency through the COVID-19 pandemic. Ultimately, there's a lot of uncertainty. There are some actions we can take in the face of that uncertainty, and I'm excited that you're taking time here to help. Help your agency and do the best you can amidst the circumstances. I'll be sharing 15 to 20 minutes of slides with advice, and then we'll do Q&A. Please share the Q&A in chat, and depending on the questions, I may unmute you or bring you in via video if there's some things to discuss further. I am, in fact, recording today, so do keep in mind if there's something confidential, you may not want to share that, because it will go into the recording that will be distributed. And since everyone has pre-registered, I will be able to follow up with the slides as well, in addition to the recording. So thank you so much for joining. You are currently muted, so people will not be able to hear you, but feel free to post things into chat. We have people joining from all over the world and across the US. Thank you so much for being here in a rather difficult time. So let's dive in. Here is the plan for today's Q&A call about the COVID-19 pandemic as it may impact your agency. It's based on what we know today as of Thursday, March 19th, 2020. I planned this last Friday and things have continued to evolve rapidly since then. So this is as of where we are now as of Thursday, March 19th, 2020. We'll start by understanding broad risk assumptions that I'm making across the agency industry and the world in general. And then we'll look at risks specific to your agency. Those will be unique to you and your firm. We'll start prioritizing what to do next. As we're going along, think about which things seem most applicable to you and your agency, and take some notes on where you want to prioritize. I'm glad to answer questions as we work through that. And speaking of that, I want to make sure that we answer all of your top questions. We're planning on an hour today, again, 15 to 20 minutes or so of slides, but I will stay on as long as needed to answer your questions. And of course, if you do need to drop off, we'll have the recording for, we'll get that to you by next week. Logistically, please ask questions via chat. Everyone is currently muted other than me. And depending on your question, it may make sense. I may unmute you so you can join via video if you like, and we can talk through your questions for everyone. As a reminder, since we are recording, I wouldn't recommend sharing anything that is confidential. Yes, I am an agency consultant, but there's no sales pitch today. In fact, in a bit, I'll share a free resource to help you stay on track. So thank you so much for being here. I've been getting a lot of questions from agency owners and leaders over the past couple weeks, and it's definitely accelerated in the past week about how things are going to go, what to do, and what next. Over the long term, I am optimistic. We will get through this, or almost everyone will in some way. But short term, I am pessimistic. This is a scary time. However, amidst the current extreme uncertainty, some things are certain. And by focusing there on what we can control, we can take action and do our best to emerge from this, possibly stronger, but at least ideally intact. If you want to distill my advice from today into 3 bullets, consider these 3 high-level priorities. First, it's about leadership. As business owners and agency leaders, we're in a position to help, and people are looking to us. Our employees, our contractors, our clients, our prospective clients, and our larger communities, as well as vendors you work with, they are looking to us to lead. We may not feel ready, but they're looking to us, and now is an opportunity to step up. Second, action. Even in the face of uncertainty, we must take calculated actions now, or else things will surely be worse later when we have less time to act. This includes decisions about working with your clients, working with your team, financial decisions, communications, and more. And we'll dig in on that shortly. And third, self-care. A lot of people need us to help them. Our employees, our clients, our families, others. But we have to put on our own oxygen mask first, because if we're in trouble, we won't be able to help everyone else. And your exact degree of self-care will depend on your particular circumstances. I know that many people listening are in a higher risk category themselves. Got to put on your own oxygen mask first when possible. There's a lot of advice out there, and I think it's worth considering where the advice giver is coming from. Let me share a bit more about my background than I normally do. I know from some of the people on the line, some are current and past clients. Others are people who are on my newsletter who've been following. Otherwise, others may have just seen the link via sharing and they're like, this sounds interesting, but I don't know what to expect. Let me share a bit more about my background than I normally do to help you understand where I'm coming from on today's advice. Those orange dots, by the way, are client agencies that I've worked with. First, I was born in Germany. Both of my parents were career U.S. Army officers. They were, for sure, my original role models when it comes to leadership. Both of them were in the Army in the U.S., in Vietnam, and then ultimately served their entire career in the military. Two, they ran a small business in their retirement, and they put the kids to work starting in elementary school. It does turn out that in the US, if it's a family business, child labor laws do not apply. And so in elementary school, I was helping out with the family's rental properties. Third, my grandfather was a business professor in what we would now call organizational behavior for more than 40 years. And he was also a management consultant working with large companies about working more effectively with their employees. So ultimately, I've been thinking about business for a long time. Fourth, I've been thinking about digital marketing. I've been in digital marketing for more than 20 years, starting as a web designer, self-taught as a freelance web designer in high school and college, starting back in the days of dial-up. Fast forward from there, after college, I worked at a mutual fund company for 4 years, including 2 years as an investment research analyst for our $1.5 billion North American strategy. And in that role, I was analyzing companies in every single industry. I'm not an expert on the medical aspects, of course, of COVID-19. I did date an epidemiologist, and so I have some unique perspective on some of the behind-the-scenes decision-making process, public health-wise. As an agency consultant, I've worked with over 350 agencies in every continent, dozens of countries, every continent except Antarctica, and having been as an agency employee prior to that, I was head of operations at an agency that was struggling financially. And so I've seen the stress that you're under right now. And I will say as a caveat, I do naturally tend toward risk management rather than risk taking. So that does inform my advice. From that background, let's consider my broad risk assumptions about what's coming up and where things are headed. Again, I am recording this and will be sharing this and the slides afterwards for everyone who is pre-registered. Here are 6 things I'm assuming right now across all agencies. First, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. This is not business as usual for at least a few months and probably longer. Based on the initial questions that I'm getting, some people are doing okay and a lot of people are struggling. Some questions I've gotten are, how is this similar or different from the 2008 recession? Glad to dig into that in Q&A. There are some similarities, but there are a lot of differences. So it's hard to use that to project exactly what will happen. 2, from dating the epidemiologist, I was surprised to realize that infectious diseases weren't as or aren't normally as fully under control as I might have expected, even under normal circumstances. That is not promising. Third, history can inform our future actions. It's not an identical situation before, but ultimately, there's almost a certain rationality to irrationality, including everyone being distracted. We'll talk more about distraction shortly. Number 4, the importance of over-communicating. If you don't communicate with your stakeholders, you are creating an information and a leadership vacuum. And when there's a vacuum like that, people will start making their own assumptions, often filling in the worst possible outcome that may not be necessarily what you're thinking. Now is the time to over-communicate with all of your stakeholders. And number 5, and if you want to get a screenshot of this particular slide, this is all of the points on this particular slide. If you have less than 6 months of cash, that is 6 months of expenses at your agency, you are highly at risk of going out of business, especially if recession hits. I shared an article in May of 2019 about recession preparation, noting how long it had been since the last recession relative to typical recession cycles, focusing on the US specifically. And at the time, when I scheduled the article to go out a few weeks later, I was worried that it might not be in time back in May of 2019, that it might have been too late to help people. Almost a year later, we haven't for sure hit recession, though the latest projections suggest we may be heading into it. That is one of the challenges regarding recessions. You don't know if it's happened until it has already started. But at a high level, these are 5 points to consider that would apply to all agencies and the industry in general. Now, let's take a look at specific risks related to your unique agency. And then after that, we'll get into Q&A to answer your specific questions. Here are my top 6 priorities to consider. You'll need to decide which of these are the highest priorities for you right now based on your agency's specific risks. Number 1, reducing systems failure. In my experience, I've found a lot of agency owners are often surprised by what I see as an agency consultant as predictable problems. One of those problems is the idea of systems failure, where one person makes a mistake and things tend to cascade from there. But it wasn't so much about the individual mistake, it's that within the system in which they were operating, whether you're looking at a project or a client relationship or the agency in general or the industry or the world as a whole, the reality is that systems are complex. And if you read the book Meltdown from 2018 by Clearfield and Tilsac, it's Meltdown, Why Our Systems Fail and What to Do About It. It digs into that even more. I know almost all of my clients have heard my recommendation about reading Meltdown to reduce systems failure. Now more than ever, read the book Meltdown. At a high level, one of the key points is that when you've got a complex system, it is more likely to fail than a simple system. The idea is that in a complex system, even the system designer may not be able to anticipate all of the ways in which the system might fail. Additionally, coupling is a factor as well. Tight versus loose coupling. Loose coupling would be there are a number of different steps, but the impact from one to another, it's not an immediate impact. In contrast, tight coupling is where one thing breaks and suddenly everything else breaks as well. That's why, for instance, in the stock market, they have the circuit breaker, so that if things drop dramatically at one point, they pause trading to give things a chance to reset. That's an example of loosening the coupling, even, of course, after a significant drop. So read the book Meltdown. Number 2 is about finances. Specifically, think about whether your financial situation is shaky, stable, or strong. Now, what does that mean? Well, these are my labels and my definition. Under normal circumstances, here's the amount of cash that I would consider for shaky, stable, and strong. And again, this is the months of expenses you have in cash. Shaky would be less than 3 months of expenses. Stable would be 6+ months of expenses. And strong would be 12+ months of expenses, that you have 1 year of expenses or more. There's not an equal distribution of these. I would say that in my experience, that strong category, that's like 10% of agencies. A significant portion are shaky and others are stable. Now, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, is that enough right now? I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. I will say that the stronger your cash position and to an extent your access to a line of credit or other cash is going to be really important right now. I've gotten questions about how to handle that and how to build cash. We can dig into that in the Q&A based on your particular situation. I will say that your team is going to be your largest ongoing expense. Agencies are typically putting 50% to 60% of their revenue toward labor between employees, owner compensation, and contractors. If you were above 60%, regardless of the amount of cash you have, I would consider you to be in a shaky spot. Additionally, if you've got a client concentration problem, that is at least one client that is more than 20% of your business, that makes things shaky and you need more cash. That could also be true if you're getting leads, inbound leads, more than 20% from a single lead referral source, whether that's another agency, a software vendor, something like that. All that said, don't be penny wise, pound foolish. I've gotten some questions around when should we slow down payments to our vendors? And that may be necessary. It is worth considering, though, if your cash position is okay, if you're in the stable or strong category, consider helping people. For instance, the scenario would be early over the past week, I've reached out to all of my active and pending freelancers, and I've offered to prepay upcoming invoices, $300, $500, $1,000 for work that I plan to do with them, in sometime this year. And ultimately, I'd rather be seen as the person offering to help them rather than trying to slow roll payments. Pete, to your question on chat, you asked, are your cash reserves based on zero revenue? That sounds very drastic. I don't think most agencies are going to go to zero revenue, but ultimately, the larger your cash reserves, the longer you can survive a drop. If it drops 10% or 20%, and that 20% was your profit margin, you'll be in trouble. So no, I'm not assuming that most agencies will drop 100% to zero. But the more cash you have, the more confident you'll be. We talked about over-communication before. You want to avoid creating a communication or information or leadership vacuum. This is about empathy. If people don't hear from you, they're wondering what's going on. And your stakeholders include your employees and contractors, your clients, your prospective clients, as well as your vendors and potentially the larger community. If people assume incorrectly because you're not saying anything, they're more likely to panic and life is going to be harder for you. In a bad situation, most people would rather hear the truth rather than nothing. I mentioned that my grandfather was an organizational behavior professor for decades. And I read some of his research from the 1950s. And one of the things he found was that employees at large corporations wanted their managers to treat them like people rather than just workers. Treat them like people rather than just workers, cogs in a machine. We've known that for decades, yet what would your employees say? How would they say you are treating them? Are you treating them like people or like workers? Now more than ever, that is vital. Distraction is a major factor right now. I would recommend assuming that everyone around you is currently distracted. You're distracted. Your team is distracted. Your clients, your prospects, your service providers, everyone around you. And when you adopt that mindset and assume that everyone is distracted, you can create some new structures, extra structure to help stay on track. For instance, with your client-facing work, especially with employees doing client deliverables, Now is the time to add an extra layer of quality assurance, QA. Maybe if you do one review, it's time to do a second review, depending on the particulars. If you are doing PPC for clients and you've got budget going out, now is the time to add an extra layer of oversight for PPC spend. And maybe you've been doing things on something of a just-in-time turnaround basis. Maybe if you're doing content marketing and marketing automation, maybe you've got a situation where normally, your most annoying client sends you things, the day before it goes out, and you get it done and you send it out. They need to give you more lead time right now. Because if you're going to make a mistake, it's in that tight coupling kind of situation. We're more prone to accidents. Last week in the US, as I was initially planning this, something like 4 states had schools that were closed. By earlier this week in the US, it was 33. And there are, of course, entire countries where everything is shut down. I do think it may be only a matter of time before most countries have whether some sort of a lockdown or some sort of other major restrictions. If you have kids and they are home from school right now, that is tough. One of my freelancers has 4 kids. All of them are home right now. She is enlisting the older ones to help manage the youngest. And then she and her husband take turns managing the kids when one of them is going to be on a conference call. She or her husband. The kids are not on the conference calls yet, at least not formally. Of course, if you're a single parent managing your kids, that's really tough. As you think about your kids interrupting you throughout the day, there's the idea of the Pomodoro timer, where maybe you spend 50 minutes working, 10 minutes not working, or things like that. You may want to consider creating some sort of a Pomodoro timer for your kids, where they don't interrupt you for some period, and then they can interrupt you. Once the timer goes off, you'll have to find the right pace for you and for them. 2 more points before we go into Q&A. Regarding your services, now is the time to consider repackaging your services to reduce your client's risk. As I speak with agency owners, I'm seeing a sales slowdown. I'm seeing some clients or prospective clients for the agencies put a hold on things. In other cases, especially in the hardest hit industries, clients are cutting back, either reducing, pausing, or canceling altogether. As you think about working with your prospective clients, what are some things you can do to repackage to reduce their risk? For instance, if you're used to doing 12-month retainers, you might anchor to say, we usually do 12, but given the uncertainty, we're willing to do a 6-month commitment. Maybe normally you do 6, you anchor off the 6 and say, we'll accept a 3-month commitment. 3 is not ideal compared to 6 or compared to 12, but it's better than 0, especially from a recurring revenue standpoint. If you normally do very large projects to start and people are leery or reluctant to start on those larger projects, now's the time to identify paid discovery options, or the time to do things along the lines of maybe a phase 1 rather than people committing to an entire large project in the first place. And number 6, and if you want to get a screenshot of the slide, now's your chance. Here are all 6 points before we go into the Q&A. Around self-care, putting on your own oxygen mask first. How can you take care of yourself? This may include things like an email-free weekend, meditation, time to unplug, or bad TV. There are limits to how much that can help, but I will say on Netflix right now, the series Love is Blind, the reality dating show, has been a helpful trashy distraction. Be careful about dangers around self-medicating that can help maybe in the short term, but not medium and long term. Consider your own support structure. Ultimately, beyond my employees and freelancers, my structure includes a therapist, life coach, sales coach, financial planner, and personal trainer. I believe that almost everyone benefits from therapy, and if you don't have a therapist now, this may be a time to explore getting some extra help. I'm taking a 3-day weekend coming up this weekend. I planned that about a month ago, all the more important now than ever before. Current clients can text me if they have an emergency, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I will not formally be on email. So if you wanted to get a screenshot, now's your chance to get all 6 points. And I see some questions are coming in via chat. If you ask a question and you're open to joining on video as well, I'm glad to do that. Otherwise, certainly we can answer it where I'm talking and you're sharing via chat. I mentioned I would have a resource for you. So if you have questions, go ahead and share them in chat, including sharing if you're okay to go on video, in which case we can bring you on and we can talk that way. As you're dealing with distraction, I have a free resource for you, which is my 30-day manager email series. It's 30 days of daily email reminders Monday through Friday to help you improve your management skills and stay on track as a manager. They're from my 2016 book, Made to Lead. There's no sales pitch. It is 100% free. I would encourage you to opt in on that. That's sakasandcompany.com/30-day-manager. We have some questions coming in. I see, Julie, you've asked a couple questions. I'm going to go ahead and put you on to video. Let's see if this cooperates. And as people are asking questions, ultimately, help out. So stand by, Julie. I'm going to go ahead and put you on there. And it looks like, Julie, I'm seeing you're on 2. Let me try putting you on allow to talk. Let's see if this works. Julie, I've made both of your users allowed to talk. You can unmute yourself and then go ahead and you're welcome to speak.
Okay, great. Good morning, Karl.
Hi, Julie.
So I had, do you want me to I don't see.
You know what, it looks like there's not a video option, so you'll just be on
perfect.
audio. Go ahead.
Okay, so I had 2 questions. The first was when you were talking about the amount of cash reserves at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. Are you including a line of credit as a cash reserve option, or are you talking pure cash in the bank?
I am talking pure cash in the bank. You're certainly welcome to include access to the line of credit. I mean, because it functions like cash, and certainly your interest rates are going to be very low right now. In general, I would recommend that you don't borrow money unless you are fairly confident you can pay it back. I'd worked with a client a while back who had run up her line of credit to the size of a mortgage. I mean, a small mortgage, but the size of a mortgage, and was able to help her through getting that paid down. But if things hadn't worked out, she could have lost her house since she had signed personally on the line of credit. So you can include access to line of credit in your near cash kind of calculations, but up to you on your risk tolerance about how much you want to borrow.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
My second question, as you know, my agency is exclusively in the adventure travel agency. Our clients are in great distress right now and experiencing various levels of cash bleeding with refunds, uncertainty, et cetera.
Yes.
What do you suggest? How should I address clients who have large outstanding invoices that are coming due and they are already in trouble in terms of trying to either get paid fully or in part? Of course, I'm concerned that I might not get paid at all. And I also want to support this client through this difficult time.
Yes.
So what's a suggestion there for how to approach that?
That's really tough. And I see that we've gotten some questions related to that around, for instance, example, if your client is related, clients are focused on event management, what do you do? What about situations where you're focused on other events, kind of thing, where you know that everyone is going to be struggling? You're going to have to find a balancing act. People tend to pay the invoices that, to the squeakiest wheel. but you also don't want it to come across like you're harassing them or assume they're going to go out of business. So I would recommend by leading by saying, we know it's a tough time right now. How can we support you? For instance, you may want to consider, say they've got an invoice coming due. Um, you might ask them, do they need accommodations? Are there things that that you can do to help them? For instance, maybe it's splitting their payment. Maybe they've got a monthly retainer. Maybe they pay half now and the other half in the middle of the coming month. You're still saying the money is due. You're not waiving the fees, but you're basically letting them pay it a bit further out. The idea there is that it's better for you to get half now rather than potentially nothing if they're freaking out about which bills they're going to pay. That's something to consider. Ultimately, this is about open communications, um, you know, so that they feel safe sharing if they're concerned. But does that make sense around if you've got a pending invoice and you're not sure if they're going to pay it?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And this particular client, we have a strong and a long-term relationship. And my thought is to ping them on Skype and do a phone call, but do not send any kind of an email or official communication. Just ask for a chat to keep it as casual and supportive as possible of him.
That makes sense. So that ultimately they're seeing you as someone who's there to help them, as a strategic partner rather than a bill collector. I've gotten questions from agency owners around how do we handle sales follow-ups right now. Now is not the time to come across as money grubbing or like you're trying to get their cash. It's tough. Especially if for agencies are in a situation where you need the cash yourselves. But if you show up and you look like a bill collector, um, a lot of agencies are like, I don't want to be seen as an order taker or as a vendor. A good way to do that is to not lead with give us the money. That's what a vendor or an order taker would do. Your client knows why you're calling. It's you know they know you're wondering. But focus on asking how they're doing, asking where they're struggling, and things will naturally segue into the money side. Does that help?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you can go ahead and mute yourself again, Julie. I saw that we have a question from let's see, from Wolkan. Let me bring you in. And Wolkan, I'm going to go ahead and enable you if you want to speak. If you do, go ahead and unmute yourself, and and you're you're welcome to speak.
Hi.
Hello.
You talked about PPC agencies and adding an extra layer of oversight. We
Yes.
are an agency completely focused on Google Ads. So what exactly do you mean by extra layer of oversight?
So how do you currently make sure that you don't overspend your clients' budgets? That would be the baseline. So like what do you do to avoid that?
Daily budgets.
Okay. So
But the search volume goes down anyway. So, not everybody is interested in a plumber or, travel, like hotels and resorts, no one's going
right.
anywhere. In Austria,
Exactly.
we are kind of in a lockdown. I'm from Austria, so all hotels are closed. All schools are closed. So, we are pausing the campaigns anyway because the
Okay.
clients say we have to pause it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So you mean an oversight, not overspending the budget of the clients?
Correct. Like if you think about within PPC, common things are you overspend the budget, or there's some sort of a surge. I had a circumstance where one of my clients had a surge in one day where they had built-in caps, but they ultimately overspent the client's budget within one day by $20,000 due to some breaking news that ultimately spiked beyond the budget, due to that breaking news, their Google account manager was like, don't worry, we'll take care of it. The agency used that assurance to tell the client, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And then the account manager at Google came back and said, well, actually, I only have sign off on, under $10,000 in spend. What about the overage? He needed approval from 2 layers above, and the Google director above and above was basically like, due to the circumstances, the daily average is still on track, so no, we're not going to comp that. They would comp the 10,000, but not the additional amount above that. Ultimately, the agency had to do some work with the client to do a mix of partly crediting services, partly like this is a totally unexpected kind of thing. If you're pausing the spend, then you're not going to overspend. Though it is certainly worth checking, whether it's you stepping in or extra people getting involved around making sure that everything truly is paused, because you don't want to find that someone has nothing to sell yet somehow ads are still running on one channel. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's also like we are earning a percentage of the spend of in Google Ads.
Yes.
And we, at the end of the day, we need to talk to our clients and say, okay, hey guys, this situation for you, it's by law. Some of our clients are not allowed to open, so we now have to talk to them and say, okay, guys, we need to pause your campaigns now. I'm pretty sure you don't want to spend any money,
right?
Because that's kind of a like a client service we want to provide, so that they say, okay, they are not just interested in making a buck,
right?
But at the same time, we are not making a buck.
Right. And that ultimately is part of where the cash reserves come in, because I know from some of the questions that people were asking, it's like, assume revenue goes down to zero. For most agencies, that won't happen. For some, it will, right? Depending on the industry and if they have a client concentration problem. But ultimately, the more cash you have, the longer you can survive a bigger drop in revenue. So, for instance, with the management fee, if you're doing the percentage, unfortunately, your revenue will go down.
Yeah.
I saw you had another question, or go ahead.
Regarding a financial thing, because I mean, we have financial reserves. I don't assume that we are going down to zero. If we lose 75% of our revenue from one month to another, we are pretty much in the shaky world. Thankfully, the Austrian government is working very hard on giving away easy, I don't know if you call mortgage or credits.
Got it.
I think mortgage is on a house and credit is like, I don't know.
Some sort of financial assistance. Yeah.
Financial assistance. So the question is between me and my business associate that we will take financial assistance, yes. The question is, how long are you going to just to use that financial assistance to keep the company alive, for the sake of keeping it alive?
Mm-hmm.
How healthy is that, and how long would you play that?
That's ultimately that fits in the category of what I think of as philosophical questions. For instance, and expanding beyond you specifically, because I don't know the particulars of your agency, but the answer is it depends. I have some clients and other agencies I've spoken with who are in a fairly shaky financial situation anyway. And so in that case, say borrowing money, it's almost like, well, wait, should we keep pouring money into a business that is struggling and was struggling in general? That may not make sense. For almost all of the agencies I work with, so it's independent agencies, anywhere from a few people getting started to as many as 700. Most are, are smaller than 700. But, in general, the agency for the owner or owners is their number one or number two financial asset. What else is pumping out 6-figure compensation, ideally 20 to 30% net profit margins, and if you plan to sell in the future, would produce some sort of a sizable payday. But I think it is worth considering, say, if you're weighing getting assistance, whether government related or otherwise, what is the end game? What would it take to get back to where you were before? Or if you weren't where you were before, what will it take to get there in the first place? For instance, if, for agency owners listening, if you're currently overwhelmed by things, on a day-to-day basis, in terms of what you have to do with your agency, I just shared my article on chat about my day-to-day involvement concept, day-to-day involvement meter. The idea of mandatory, necessary, needed, and optional. Most people want to be either needed, but not necessary, or optional. If you're currently mandatory or necessary to everything on a day-to-day basis, that's hard to get out of in general. It will be even harder now. So I think it ultimately depends on where you have been, how it's been trending, and what it would take in the midst of extreme uncertainty to get beyond that. And that's going to be unique to each agency.
Speaking of this financial assistant, we were also thinking, every crisis has a chance. So this is a worst case scenario that we would need all the money to get over it. In best case scenario, we will have some money left. Do you think it's a good time to acquire smaller agencies or freelancers right now? Just to say, look, you will need a financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, how would you do that?
It does make sense that there are going to be more freelancers on the market, and certainly agencies that might not have considered selling before might consider it. I do expect there will be a number of acqui-hires. That is a small amount of cash changing hands, but primarily it's the acquirer taking on the client cash flow from the other agency and taking on the payroll liabilities for the other agency. Of course, not all of the clients are going to want to jump, and not all the employees will want to jump, and or you may not want to bring all of the people. So that's going to be a case-by-case basis. I do expect some of that. I mean, in my work, I talk to plenty of agency owners who don't love running the agency anyway. And so the idea of basically saying, I could just hand this off to someone else and it's not my problem anymore, I do see that being very appealing to a lot of people. Certainly not everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw you did ask, and this is a question I've gotten from a number of people, and I'm going to switch over to other questions, after this. Yeah. But thank you for joining. I'm going to go ahead and switch you off to, switch you off. I'm going to go ahead and answer the question you asked about how does this compare to 2008. So, Volkan, thank you for asking the questions.
Thank you.
So the question I've gotten from several people is, how does this compare to the financial crisis in 2008? And there are some similarities in terms of potential or, then recession and now potential recession, although I wouldn't be surprised if recession is officially declared soon. But there are a lot of differences. I was just talking with my colleague, Diane Stadlin, my director of agency services. Diane has worked in agencies since the early 80s. And Diane, let me go ahead and bring you in. We can talk a bit about that. And share some insights on that. I'm going to go ahead and make you co-host. Some of the things we were talking about around the idea that, back then, it wasn't the quarantine or self-imposed quarantine or lockdown. Like, people were still out and about. Many people were struggling, but there weren't the level of shutdowns. Sporting events were still happening. Concerts were still happening, things like that. So people were struggling to various degrees, and some were really struggling, but there wasn't that level of shutdown we're experiencing now. Diane, if you wanted to extend or anything you'd further say?
Yes, thank you for everyone for joining today. As Karl and I were chatting, thinking back to 2008, prior to that time period, everything was still more big branding and big media. Digital was coming, but it was nowhere near the one-on-one and one-to-many communication that we have now. One thing that was still available, there were so many companies relying on the 2008 Olympics, and the Olympics still happened. We don't have those big anchor pieces, as Karl just mentioned, to carry through on a lot of work and a lot of opportunities. What I think I'm seeing now, and it was interesting, I commented on something this morning. The side hustle has been born since then. So there is the potential for a lot of small companies to kind of view things as a side hustle. What can they do now to alter their business model very quickly to make changes? So for example, there is a produce supply company here in Raleigh, North Carolina that was supporting all of the restaurants. Every restaurant and bar here has been mandated to be closed. Very quickly, they came up with the idea and needed help to go online and say, hey, we have all of this food and perishables. We're going to open it up to consumers in the area. Check our website, tell us what you would like to buy, and we're going to do, curbside delivery. Come up to our warehouse, tell us your order, and we will give you your order. So there are opportunities for a complete shift in business model, and a lot of you agency owners with those capabilities of, quickly jumping to help some of your clients with different ideas, or even new clients who are trying to shift their business models, you still have opportunity. And, thinking out of the box on some of those things that maybe you hadn't considered before.
Makes sense. Thank you, Diane. These are certainly uncertain times, but things like over-communication, preparing for downturn, and the other things we shared all fit. So on to the next question. Joe, to answer your question, you mentioned we're getting a lot of requests for rush or urgent work. Thoughts on taking on the project, or basically creating a conditional, do they need to make a longer term commitment before you provide urgent project support? And if you wanted to chat further on this, I can go ahead and make you a speaker if you like. Let me switch that over. So Joe, if you do want to speak, you're welcome to. You can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and just answer that, as is.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Joe.
Hey, how's it going, Karl? Thanks for the time. Yeah, the question's pretty much just a lot of brands kind of scrambling to figure out how to respond. We've been getting a lot of rush requests for projects that are on the smaller scale. And those do make it challenging when we're already trying to service our key accounts and take care of them. And so one of our thoughts has been to kind of request that they commit to some kind of long-term engagement with us for us to take on the extra load of a smaller, more urgent project.
So there are a couple things going on there. One, some of it depends on capacity, right? And answering this more broadly, if you focused on a lot of hospitality clients and that's drying up, and then someone else shows up and needs something urgently, you probably have the capacity to do it. But regardless, I would recommend doing some expectations management to say, normally we wouldn't take something at this budget, but we do have some additional capacity, we can. The question of whether to require a long-term engagement, I think it's worth a try. I don't know how many people will want to commit to it right now. But that actually gives you an opportunity. Was sharing yesterday, I did a training on agency project management fundamentals. And one of the things that I talked about, and I'll go ahead and share it in chat, is a concept I call reason, options, choose. The idea is that if someone wants something and you don't want to give them exactly what they want based on the terms they want, you start by citing a reason. We'd love to do that. We primarily work with clients on an ongoing retainer basis or for a much larger project than what you have in mind. Then you give them 2 or 3 options. So that might be, for instance, there are a few ways we could get this done. You could sign a 12-month retainer, and we could fit that into the first month of the retainer, along with other things we could do to help. Or you could pay some sort of a rush rate or some sort of surcharge for handling it on a one-off basis, as in like charge twice as much, or something along those lines, because they're not making a larger commitment. That's something I do with my work, where if someone is an executive coaching client and they've got a question, that's part of their coaching. If someone's doing an agency roadmap project or custom consulting and questions come up, great, I can help. If someone shows up and they have one question and that's it, that's charged at, well, the total amount is low relative to an ongoing engagement, but, in a sense, the per minute is pretty high because there's no commitment. And also, it is worth considering that if someone just shows up and has, one small request that is very urgent, you don't have any context on them. If a client I've worked with for 4 years asks me a question, I know all about them. I know all of the context of where they've been before and what they've tried before. And, when they say I'm having an issue with so-and-so employee, I know about the employee. So I would consider giving them some options. I do like the idea of a retainer as an option, but you might want to consider whether some sort of a, one-off surcharge and also a rush surcharge makes sense, given the circumstances. Not everyone's going to commit, but you'll have to decide what's the right combo for you. Does that help?
Yeah, very helpful. Appreciate that.
Cool. Thank you. Go ahead and take you off talking. So there's a question via Q&A about what about low base compensation sales associates to help them stay afloat. I was speaking with an agency owner about this earlier today. In their case, they are increasing the base somewhat for everyone on a temporary basis. This is not a permanent thing, but the goal is to help sustain people. What some agencies might be doing is they do compensation as a form of draw against future commission. So they're getting some sort of additional compensation now, but that, future commissions get deducted out of that. You'll have to find out what's right for you. You also might be in a circumstance where you just can't afford to keep all of the salespeople, and you may have to do some layoffs. I would recommend speaking with your accountant to sort out what's the right combo for you. If you've got strong people that can turn it around, then I would consider temporarily looking for ways to increase their base. And if not, there may be some people who unfortunately have to go. I will say in the conversation I had earlier today, the feedback the owner got from the salespeople whose bases were temporarily increased was increased loyalty. Like, they know that part of their job is to help get revenue in the door to help secure everyone else's jobs. So it'll also depend on your culture as well. So thanks for asking on that. Tied into reason, options, choose, I saw we had a question from an anonymous attendee. This is regarding reason, options, choose when you have prospects who expect you to cut your rates for them. So the question was, I recently read your blog post on reason, options, choose about how to effectively say no to prospects looking for reduced rates on a new project. Given that so many of my clients, and this is an agency, they say they specialize in small business owners, are worried and anxious about their own cash flow, how can I capture their new business without reducing my rates or buckling? I'd like to keep my rates as much as possible without becoming uncompetitive. Great question. So you'll have to decide for yourself whether you would cut your rates or not. I know you don't want to. That ideally is not the first place to go. And I certainly wouldn't do it without getting some sort of a larger commitment and some sort of an upfront deposit and things like that. It would be worth considering at this point, are there, beyond the services you're offering, are there other things you can offer your clients that are more training and empowerment oriented? So maybe the services lift is relatively small, but you're providing something else. For instance, I just shared a link to my agency services framework that's around my concept of think, teach, do. A lot of agencies want to be strategy first. That's think. That's the, client is asking, what should I do now? Teach is training and empowerment, where the client is asking, I want to do it myself. Show me how. And then do, think, teach, do is that implementation. Client is saying, do it for me. And, an untapped opportunity, but I think one that will be especially valuable now is around teach, around training and empowerment. That could include training your clients on how to do things in-house, where if they're like, you know what, we can't afford to keep doing this, through you anymore, but can you show us how to do it? In a stronger market, that can include helping them recruit people to do things in-house, because if they're going to take it in-house anyway, you might as well get paid to help them through that process. And the related aspect is around training your clients, and consider opportunities for you to develop training products, or it could be a training course. You could do live training to do that with multiple clients. Is this a circumstance where maybe instead of providing primarily strategy and implementation, primarily think and do, maybe you're doing some think, some do, and you're also doing teach. You're also upgrading their own skills. In my experience, your clients are likely to find that things are not as easy as they expected, but at least if they're taking on some of the lift of some of the work to get done, that can help you justify providing less around do related services. So I've shared a link to that. That's my agency services framework, Think, Teach, Do, that may give you some ways to cut their budget without also over delivering on the services you provide to them. So thanks for sharing that question. We've got a couple more questions in the Q&A queue, and then see more on chat. If you have more questions, and if you haven't shared them yet, please include them in Q&A or on chat. And we're almost at an hour or so. I'm going to keep going. If you need to drop off, you're certainly welcome to, and you'll get the recording later. So we got a question about a large chunk of our clients are hospitality brands who've put our retainers on hold. And what can we do during this time when half of the clients are on hold? I have a specific resource for you related to restaurants within hospitality. This was an article that I saw, or a resource from the other day from Restaurant 365. I've just shared that in chat. If you're listening to the recording, the article is Managing Restaurant Operations During the COVID-19 Pandemic. There are a roundup of various articles, advice on government relief, health and sanitation, delivery and creativity ideas, and monetary and community support, including, if you're in the US, about Small Business Administration disaster assistance loans, and other options as well. So that's at restaurant365.com to share that. In terms of what to do when your accounts are on hold, that'll be unique to your agency. So if half are on hold, you may unfortunately have to do some layoffs. And that is going to be tough. If your team suddenly has this extra capacity, I think you can weigh, what do you want them to be doing? Is this the time to work on your own self-marketing activities? Is this a time to work on product development, work on services development, so that when things turn around, I think they will turn around. The question is when. What can you do to lay the groundwork for that? You unfortunately can't afford to keep them forever, but there are some roll up your sleeves kinds of things you can do now. On chat, I shared an article around self-marketing priorities, around where to focus your own marketing. This is oriented toward if you've just hired a director of marketing for agency yourself, it ultimately applies in other situations as well. Another question we saw, what about social media? Should you maintain a social presence, or should you stop posting altogether, or do you want to stay top of mind? Some of that depends on your agency's culture and your general social media content strategy. I did pause all of my automated feeds via various channels and did a review with my team to see, is there anything coming up that's a concern? For instance, I have an article around doing debriefs, project and retainer debriefs, and the theme is around avoiding mistakes, and the featured image for that is an operating room, which makes sense. The idea of debriefs come from the military and from medical environments, but showing a hospital right now, not a good idea. So I took that out of the queue. In general, I think it's worth looking at what you're sharing overall. Because people are certainly on edge. You don't want to be like the ad I saw for Alitalia, the airline, in the Washington D.C. Metro subway, where the ad said something like, you could shop for an Italian suit downtown, or you could fly to Italy and shop till you drop. I'm guessing the person who placed that media right now is not thrilled that the poster was still up. Perhaps it's been removed at this point. So I would say don't stop altogether, but make sure that your social media posts don't look like they're pandering, and be helpful. And I'm not sure your posts have to be or even should be 100% about COVID-19, because people do want to talk about other things. Businesses are continuing. And another question was around, what industries do you think are thriving in this time? I don't think most industries are thriving. Did talk to an agency owner whose clients include lawyers, including lawyers who do personal injury law, and they are expecting their business to go up. For instance, and this is focusing on the US, with airlines cutting prices, fuel prices going down, people are going to drive more, and driving, is per mile less safe. They're expecting personal injury claims to go up. Certainly if people are related to bankruptcy related services, I could see that doing well. Payday loans. You have to weigh, of course, are these clients that you feel comfortable working with in general? If you do need to drop off, you're certainly welcome to. We'll keep recording, and if I'll be here as long as we have questions. Philosophical question, and this is definitely one I've been thinking about. When it's all done and past, is the idea of niching to one particular industry just too risky? This clearly has been everyone's strategy, and right about now, I'm glad we didn't finalize that level of positioning. Thoughts? That is a risk. That is a risk of specializing in one industry. I have been a fan of specializing for a long time. In my case, I only work with agencies. I focus solely on agencies for the past decade. And if every agency suddenly were out of business, that would be a problem for my business. That said, there are transferable skills. For instance, in my work, my advice, it's really about running a professional services firm. I choose to focus on agencies, but it could apply to architecture, it could apply to law firms, it could apply to accounting firms. I just choose not to work with them because I like agency people and I like helping them. That does raise a question, Pete, to your question around, would it make sense to specialize in a couple industries? A challenge is most agencies who do 2 or 3 specializations tend to focus in similar areas. For instance, say, restaurants and hotels. Both of those are struggling right now. That's a challenge. So I don't know the long-term answer to that. But I think it's a reminder that you're going to have to make business choices that fit your risk tolerance. Got a few more questions. Christina, answering your question about training clients on things like conducting webinars, remote meetings, and offering those services remotely. Our clients are in the professional services industry, like business and IT consultants. Is there anything else that you can do to help them during this time? I would say, Christina, I would be thinking about how can you help them with the uncertainty they have? As IT and business consultants, they're getting tons of questions from their clients about what to do about their business. Um, to some extent, they may just need a sounding board just to be able to talk through things. Everyone needs some sort of a sounding board, whether that's a therapist, a coach, spouse or romantic partner, your business partner, someone just to bounce ideas off of and just talk through things and potentially vent. So that might be an opportunity just to do the sort of the venting call and just listen. You may not have to say much. Active listening is for sure a skill, but it's potentially worth offering that to them. And keep in mind that they're under a lot of pressure to share answers themselves, where they may not always have the answers. So consider that extra kind of meta layer of uncertainty. We've gotten some questions around remote working. If your agency has some resources or some tips on how you work remotely, would love if you shared those on chat. Get your tips on remote working. I am seeing a lot of articles about remote work. Was speaking with a client earlier this week, has been home for a few days. His kids are bouncing off the wall and, maybe getting near his limit on that. And of course, there's more to come. I work from home most of the time. I have a co-working space, but I still do leave the house normally. So, that's a factor. If you have some sharing around remote work, would love to see your sharing. Kelly, thanks so much for sharing the article. You mentioned working remotely for 8 years. Here are the tips. To go ahead and share that in chat. And if you're listening to the recording, you can go to Collins-company, COLLINS the word company.com. And there's an article on remotely working. Christina, thank you for sharing the article where you've tagged COVID-related content at sparkative.com, and then you've tagged the COVID-19 related pieces. There is a lot out there, do consider, with all of this, what's the bias or the motivation of someone sharing it. People have different incentives. I've noticed some advice out there about, use this as a time to grow as your weaker competitors go out of business. That may technically be true, but I don't know. I'm not sure that's really a good way to approach things. But if it works for you, then so be it. Zahira, thank you for sharing about being fully remote. Would love to share tips and strategies for people who transition to work from home around how to reach the people who need this info. If you have some articles, feel free to share those on chat. Or if you're going to be sharing some articles, feel free to share your agency website, and we'll, and can kind of get the word out about that. And I think actually I will be on a conversation next week with either with you or one of your colleagues at the agency. So small world. So thank you for sharing that. And Zahira, if you have a link to share to your homepage, if there are going to be more articles coming up, feel free to share it. Julie, thanks for joining. Got a few more questions. Zahira, thank you for sharing there. And Tessa, thank you for the suggestion around a virtual happy hour. Love that idea. If you're not currently a subscriber to my newsletter, I'll be sharing some one-on-one opportunities coming up and a group opportunity as well. I think sometimes we just need people to talk to. So thank you. Matt, you had asked the questions have been covered before, but if a client has cash flow problems, whether to offer a big discount to them or not, if they pay up front for work that you'll deliver later, I'd say that's up to you as to how much of a discount you want to offer. That's an it depends. I am not offering any discounts. I am offering changes to payment terms. For instance, pay half now, pay the other half in a couple weeks, or in a month. You'll have to find the right approach for you. I probably wouldn't recommend offering more than a 20% discount, or ideally not more than 5 or 10. But you'll need to decide what is right for you. If you have any more questions, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A feature. I'm checking through chat to see if I missed any earlier. Let's see. Okay. I saw we had a question about how would you calculate months of cash? Basically, take a look at your expenses over the year, and that's projected out. So if you've hired more people, your expenses, of course, are up. Divide it by 12, and then look for seasonality. If there are points where, say, in December, you tend to prepay a bunch of expenses, it's worth looking about, how is that going to shift around? Are you going to pay some of them sooner? Can you push them out a bit later? They're going to happen at some point. So the simplest is to take annual expenses, divide by 12 to get monthly, and then divide your cash position by that number. That'll give you a general idea, but it could go faster, it could go slower, depending on your particular circumstances. Let's see, looking through other questions. Final call on questions. If you have any other questions, now is your chance to ask them either through the Q&A or otherwise. Otherwise, you know what? Actually, do you have a few more? This received some questions beforehand. There's a question of whether to slow payments to your vendors. That's up to you. It depends on your cash situation. Like I said, I am offering to prepay people because my financial situation is doing okay, and I want to take care of the people that are helping me. Question was, an agency is going to do a furlough of more than half their staff based on their industry positioning, and the industry struggling. And I'm sorry, that's really bad. There's a question of how to service the clients with a skeleton crew, and you're also not sure which clients are going to have cash to pay you. The question is how to balance doing work so that you're helpful to clients and not breaching your contract, but also not doing work you won't get paid for. You're already rethinking payment terms, but you can't change the terms in your current contract, or can we? In terms of whether you can change terms of the current contract, that is that's a lawyer question. With that, you might consider speaking with Matchstick Legal. Gabe Levine and his team, they're based on the West Coast of the US. They're at matchstick.legal.com. They've worked with several of my clients around legal aspects, and I've worked with them as well on my current master services agreement. Another agency-related legal expert would be Sharon Turek at legalandcreative.com. Sharon is based in Cleveland. She does a lot of work related to intellectual property related law. I've included her website as well. So that's matchstick.legal and legalandcreative.com. In terms of any contract modifications, I would speak to the lawyers on that. I think ultimately over communication is where this comes in. If you've unfortunately reduced your team, or you're about to, and your clients may not be paying, or some may be cutting themselves, this would be about open communication with them. They may be afraid to tell you that they need to stop. Make it safe for them to say, we're scared and we're thinking of making cuts because we can't sell our product or service right now. This may be a situation where if you release some of your clients from their contracts, maybe they weren't going to pay you anyway, or things would have quickly collapsed, and then now you're not on the hook to fulfill that. So you'll have to decide what you offer to which client, but it may be worth considering offering to let them out of the contract so that you don't end up on the hook to do work that you can't easily service and won't get paid for. In terms of managing the work in general, this is going to be some long nights for the executive and leadership team. around how to support people. This is going to be a tough situation, and that's where self-care comes in, around taking care of yourselves. That may be that you need to turn off your email at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. and just look away from email for a bit, to help. The Headspace app is helpful, but there are limits to what exactly we can do. Um, that's that's a challenging situation. I'm sharing an article on chat, my article about when you're feeling overwhelmed. I have clients who call me their agency therapist. I'm not an actual therapist, but the article is about 15 ways to recharge in 15 minutes a piece. You ultimately will need long-term support, but these are things that can help in the interim. We've got a few more questions coming in. When you have new clients, should you consider reducing fees for the new clients as things come back, or is that short-sighted? I would avoid reducing fees for new people because, ultimately with new clients, that is your strongest opportunity to anchor strong pricing. And if you reduce it, you are unlikely to increase that significantly. It's not impossible. I have an article on how to raise prices for your current clients, sharing that in chat. It is way harder to do that with current clients once they're used to a particular price point than the rest. Got a question around how transparent should we be about our agency's financial situation with current and prospective clients, including, for instance, if you're doing layoffs and how that might impact them. Regardless of your culture in terms of transparency or not, if the client's account manager, whether they're a formal account manager or they're the day-to-day contact of the agency, if suddenly they got an out of office that so and so doesn't work here anymore, they're gonna know. I don't know if you have to describe all of the details to everyone, but I think people are going to know, and you're going to have to decide how much you feel comfortable sharing. I'm not sure I'd really recommend necessarily keeping secrets because those will soon get out anyway. Got a couple more questions. One is around how to do sales. I certainly would look at changing your sales outreach approach and your sales follow-up approach. There's the idea from the book, The Human Brand, about warmth and competence. If you're on chat, I'm sharing a link to that. The idea there is that, competence is to get the job done. Warmth is, are you making people feel special? So if you launch into usual sales follow-up or sales outreach and you pretend that COVID-19 coronavirus, that it's not happening, that's going to look tone deaf because everyone knows that it's happening and everyone's thinking about it. So I wouldn't pretend that, that it's not there. Ask how they're doing, ask how it's impacting them, and listen. Don't just ask and then wait your turn to speak. Couple more questions. Shelley asked, is there anything a young and growing, say under a few years in business agency, can do to help keep up the momentum amidst struggling or during this time to avoid losing too much momentum? That's a tough question. I'm not sure you'll be able to keep all of your momentum. You're going to lose some, most likely. The question is, make sure that everyone around you understands, understands where you're going, and what the plan is, and kind of what's going on. What are you thinking about? Keep in mind that this could be a challenge even for more longer tenured agencies. Got some feedback from a client's executive team where their employees were saying, you know what, we have a good idea about the agency's direction, but we're not sure what it looks like. Like, how many employees are we eventually going to have? Are we going to still be in this office, or are we going somewhere else? Things like that. It's worth communicating about that. Um, in terms of momentum, people need to know where you're going. So I would for sure communicate that. So Shelley, thank you for that question. Got a question related to finances. If you've got clients who are currently past due, they were struggling to pay before, and now it seems even more awkward to be like, where's the money? But at the same time, of course, your agency could use the money to stay afloat. If you're on chat, I just shared all of my articles related to collections at agencies. So that's sakasandcompany.com/tag/collections. A lot of articles about a range of situations. I've including here in chat my article about accounts receivable active escalation. That article is from over a year ago, but it's about being that squeaky wheel, and what does that look like? Sharing another article about clients who always pay late. I think you're going to see a wide range of clients who are paying late now. Sharing another article, if you've got a client who's past due, how to get paid now. That article is from 5 years ago. So it is not COVID-19 specific. Here's a quick tip for your future invoices. If you want to get paid faster, don't send invoices as due on receipt. When you send them as due on receipt, you're basically saying, well, we know that you don't plan to pay this immediately, so you're going to get around to it when you get around to it. Or they'll pay on their usual terms, which might be net 30, net 60, net 14, something like that. So rather than sending your invoices due on receipt, I would give them a specific due date, so that when their accounts payable person logs the invoice in their system, they're putting in your due date, not the due date that they make up. Definitely a time for over communication related to finances. In terms of specifics, when you've got a client struggling before, I think be honest with them. I had a client conversation where I asked them directly, do you need to cancel your project? And weighing whether it made sense to cancel or waive the early termination fee. If someone isn't going to pay you, make it safe for them to share that, rather than pretending, that there isn't that elephant in the room. Looks like we are, that's about it on the question queue. Last chance on any further questions. Really appreciate your joining today. I will be getting the recording out to everyone, and we'll also figure out a way to compile all of the questions that have been coming in. Got a lot of good stuff, and also a lot of additional resources. So I'm not seeing any more, so I think we will wrap up. Shelley, glad to hear that I'm the number one resource to go to online for agency advice. I'm glad to help. For anyone here, if you're not currently getting my newsletter, I share tips twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. If you're not currently subscribing, I'm sending something out this coming Saturday that I think you'll especially like. Some ways to get additional help free of charge. And, ultimately, thank you so much. This is a tough time. And I appreciate your participating today or listening to the recording from today, March 19th, 2020. Good luck out there, and hang in there. Thanks.